we are paying, if this is affecting our security, not just Ukraine's, then we deserve the seat at the table. Europe should be at the table because the stakes are incredibly high.
Edmund Burke was a conservative. Winston Churchill was a conservative. Sir Roger Scruton was a friend of mine. He was a conservative. Maggie Thatcher was a conservative. I wrote for Bill Buckley's National Review. He was a conservative. And I don't think any of these people would approve of what's going on now.
I'll answer your question, but let me make two brief points first. First of all, I'd like to associate myself with what Minister Pistorius said, that it was natural for the United States to be in the lead in these negotiations when the United States was providing the bulk of the military assistance. And the United States was also brave and effective in deploying strategic intelligence to deprive the Russians of the casus belli in the days before the war and in the early days of the war. But I would like particularly our American guests to know, because it's not fully in the American infosphere, we are now paying for this war. The American outlay for the war for last year was close to zero. We are buying American weapons to be delivered to Ukraine. There is no package in the US Congress, and that there isn't even the prospect of a package. If we are paying, if this is affecting our security, not just Ukraine's, then we deserve the seat at the table because the outcome of this war will affect us. Number two, consider what these attacks on Kiev and other Ukrainian cities tell you about Putin's ideology. The whole invasion was justified on the pseudo-Tsarist and Soviet grounds of Ukrainians being really just misguided Russians. If we get united, they'll see the light. So they were a brotherly kind of peasant version of Russians. And Kiev was really a Russian city. So Putin is now bombing his brothers and bombing a Russian city. I think that shows you that this is in fact a colonial war. He is just bent on conquering Ukraine again. This is the third attempt. In the 19th century, they banned the printing of Ukrainian books. In the 20th century, they caused an artificial famine in which 5 million people were murdered, and the entire culture-bearing Ukrainian class was obliterated in the 1930s, and this is the third attempt. And now to your question. Putin says he wants peace, and in a sense, every dictator and every conqueror wants peace. If you give up and you capitulate, you'll have peace. But the question is, under what conditions? And Russia can tolerate Ukrainianness as a sort of provincial version, a Russian folklore. But Russia cannot tolerate Ukraine, or at least Putin cannot, as a nation with its own identity, history, interests, including security interests, and its own desire to integrate with other organizations than Russia's. And the question in this war is, who will crack first? And Ukrainians are showing that they're not cracking on the front line. Russian advances are tiny. And history teaches us that bombing populations doesn't work. The Luftwaffe didn't break the spirit of London. The Royal Air Force didn't break the will to fight of the people of Germany. In fact, they get stiffened. So the real question is, when will Putin run out of resources to carry out this war? And cracks are beginning to show in the Russian economy. We have given Ukraine 90 billion euros. That should be enough to sustain them for 2 years. If we gave them 10 or 20 billion more, they could actually get their defense industry up to full capacity, and then the fight would be more equal.
Thank you very much. We'll go back.
Europe should be at the table because the stakes are incredibly high. It's not that just the future of Ukraine, it's not just the security of the eastern flank, it is about the place of Europe in the future distribution of power in the world. In other words, who will be the third leg of global distribution? China, United States, and Russia, or the European Union? Don't ask me which I would prefer. And to my mind, President Trump is not wrong when he says that in this more brutal world, you need to show your cards. The United States would give itself more cards to pressure Putin into a deal by, for example, delivering tomahawks to Ukrainians. And the decision was apparently quite close a couple of months ago. Taurises would help too. But as Europe, what we should say is that if the US forces Ukraine into an unfair deal, we will continue with our commitment to Ukraine, and it is Ukraine that will decide when to make a deal. And then we will not be able to be ignored by Putin, because we will then become the main provider to Ukraine.
Very shortly on this.
I think Putin makes a mistake by provoking us through hybrid activities, because it stiffens our resistance and allows us to have higher defense budgets. But what he does is incredibly active. You've had assassinations in Germany and Britain. We've all had arsons. We've had attempted arsons on board airliners. We have cutting of cables and pipelines at sea. We've had the suppression of GPS signal. We've had an attempt to explode rail lines under a moving train on a high escarpment. People would have died were it not for the incompetence of the assailants. And we've had mass intrusions of Russian drones and cruise missiles into our airspace. This is all forcing us to take countermeasures. And there are further things that we could do. So I've closed down 3 Russian consulates. We've restricted the movement of Russian diplomats in Poland. We still have over 2,000 Russian diplomats. Our security services think up to 40% of them are spies. We should not be tolerating them. They should not benefit from the freedom of movement across the Schengen zone, which they are trying to destroy. And we've also spent almost €1 billion on building a big and beautiful fence on our border with Belarus, through which they were pushing migrants on purpose. So it's all costing us. It's all making us more resilient, but there are more things that we could do together.
Radek, your expressions were something beyond that I can summarize.
Because I think it's a complete falsehood to claim that mass migration was a left-wing project. It was for decades supported by Republican businessmen who wanted cheap labor from Latin America and the United States.
He's right. I agree.
Right. Also, it's complete falsehood to say that.
What about migration in Europe then?
Yeah,
Same, wanting economic growth by virtue of migration.
We are an EPP government in Poland. We've built a big and beautiful fence on our border with Belarus in 2 years, and it's completely effective. It's not a left-wing or right-wing issue. It's about, we agree that we have the right to control who comes in and who doesn't. But it's not inherently a left-wing or right-wing idea. You can have open borders like in Australia and the United States in the 19th century, or you can have welfare state. You can't have both at the same time because you end up with a disaster. Also, it's completely false to say this was a hint about how supposedly the European Union is undemocratic. False. I was a member of the European Parliament. I was democratically elected. It's a completely democratic chamber. European Commission is nominated by democratically elected governments of Europe. And
yeah, will you forgive me? What is the point you're making?
the point I'm making is that there are other forms of democracy than a national state democracy. We have constructed a democratically governed European Union, and this myth that gave us Brexit, that somehow Brussels bureaucrats are imposing directives on member states, is complete nonsense. That's not how the European Union works. We need to stick to the proper definition of conservatism. Edmund Burke was a conservative. Winston Churchill was a conservative. Sir Roger Scruton was a friend of mine. He was a conservative. Maggie Thatcher was a conservative. I wrote for Bill Buckley's National Review. He was a conservative. And I don't think any of these people would approve of what's going on now.
I can sympathize with what you're saying, and yet I would find it surprising if any conservative thought there was a single definition of conservatism. Right. It's very nature.
On Gaza,
but we are late at night, but we're still not going to go too much into the philosophy of conservatism, but I take your point. Gaza.
I personally believe that the Middle East should be run by the United States as impartially and as successfully as hitherto.
Irony is a really difficult thing to risk late at night on anything that is broadcast. Make your best point.
Sure. Oh, all right. Someone asked about Lavrov. Hillary didn't answer, so I will. I had a relationship with Lavrov based on telling each other Soviet-era jokes. So there was a competition in the Soviet Union for the best political joke. First prize, 15 years. Someone asked here about MAGA think tanks. My take on this is the following. So until recently, we had an unspoken agreement not to interfere in allied countries' party political rivalries, right? Now, President Trump received our populist candidate for the president between the first and the second round of our presidential election. So in the old days, we didn't interfere, but we did interfere on behalf of democracy in the politics of autocracies. And now it's the other way around. And actually, Prime Minister Orban has created a program.
What's the point you're making with that? That it's fair now, or?
No, I'm saying it's completely outrageous.
Right.
And in Poland, for example, it's irrational, because in Poland was for decades the most pro-American country in Europe. And the United States had a wonderful situation in which the government and the opposition, either way, was competing who would be more pro-American. Once you start choosing sides, a different dynamic will start.
It does.
But
almost out of time. We're all facing the same problem.
On civilization.
No, Radek, I'm so sorry, because you will be eloquent on this.
I have an important point on the Western civilization.
No, well, we do, because they will cut the live feed. All right, you have 1 minute on civilization, but we do actually have to let people go, and I want Peter and Ivan to have a word.
We're running out of the time.
Censorship.
Censorship.
Yeah.